Hello, this is Dread from Epic Builds. In today's video topic, we're going to be going over the second part of the Bleed Rip Blood Lich, or, you might as well call it Transplant Lich at this point, as we've finally invested in some Transplant cooldown. So, the overall idea of the build before is to utilize the new unique Shield Flare's Pride, which gives you about 100% bleed chance and 40% bleed effect, to pretty much scale your bleeds up to the point where it can actually compete with poison. And it does so to varying degrees. So the only issue I have with this build overall is its heavy reliance on uniques to function, mainly the reliance on the Flare Shield, obviously. And of course, the Valdir's Chalice, as Valdir's Chalice is a lot of damage and sustain as well, so I couldn't really think of playing the build without it. So this isn't really something I would recommend for a newer player, but if you wanted to try a different flavor of Lich and you're kind of sad about the Poison Lich nerfs, this is definitely a thing to try, especially if you have Flare's Pride already, which is, I believe, the most mandatory unique. I don't believe scaling into Salt the Wounds is worth it on this build, mainly because you get 40% bleed effect on your shield, and you can get bleed effect on your prefixes as because you're a Lich. So you might actually not even need Salt the Wounds. So next time I do visit this archetype, I might try without it. So overall, the build has performed pretty well. Just the usual things I don't like about Lich, meaning like whenever you do get knocked out of Reaper form, you feel like a wet noodle. And that's kind of just more of a Lich issue overall. Of course, having to use Death Seal and Reaper form in the same build kind of sucks for like changing the builds up. But I only play a Lich every so often, so I let it happen. So far, the build has been able to reach up to like 20k ticks on Oribus, and that's pretty good considering of how little gear I actually have. I actually don't have much in the way of gear. This build was actually kind of put together sloppily, as I am in the process of moving, and I do want to move on builds, so I am going to end it here for the Bleed Lich. Overall, I think it's a good archetype, but it requires a lot of investment, a lot more investment than the old Poison Liches used to take, which is not their fault, as because the nerf to Wandering Spirits is rather huge, even if this build could use Wandering Spirits, it'd be doing a lot more damage as well, as you'd get a lot more bleed chance procs on single target. So overall, I think the build performs, just takes a little bit too much gear, in my opinion. Uh, Other than that, the Flare's Pride Shield, I will say, definitely opens up a lot more archetypes and other places. Another thing I learned as well is, just like I learned on the Bleed Warpath build and the Bleed HOA build, is bleed duration is a lot stronger this patch, thanks to the fact that how easy it is to ramp up your bleed effect through Salt the Wounds. It means that bleed duration becomes one of your best in slot stats, and I'm totally thinking about running bleed duration fully once we actually go to this build again one day. Especially, and that makes Valdir's Chalice a lot stronger. Valdir's Chalice back in the day was kind of a not a meme. It was more of a side grade to just running like a rare relic. But now that bleed duration is so strong, thanks to the fact that bleed effect is so easy to get, Valdir's Chalice goes from like a mediocre choice for a lot of bleed builds to an insane choice for a lot of bleed builds. So whenever I play Bleed Warpath again, I might actually end up using Valdir's Chalice. But with that being said, let's get into the game, shall we? Here we are in game with the build. Just so you know, the gearing on the character isn't the best thing ever. As you can tell, I'm running a Wingari axe instead of a Dragonbone one, and that's because I haven't dropped a single Dragonbone axe that could work as an upgrade. So I will be bringing in the planner every so often just to showcase, and that will be linked in the description as well. So for skills, for the main one, we're utilizing Rip Blood. So we take 1 point travel into Arcane Absorption. This doesn't matter at all for our bleeds. 5 points into Run Dry, which is 40% more damage with our bleeds applied by Rip Blood. 1 point into Blood Catalyst, as this will make it so that if your bleed from Rip Blood kills an enemy, it will trigger it again on a different target nearby. And this is very strong, as it lets us blow up packs even harder. 5 points into splatter, so we do a blood splatter, which will do an AoE that will bleed for us. Then, of course, eviscerate for another blood splatter. This makes it so self-cast Rip Blood isn't as strong, but it makes our Rip Blood's cast from transplant even stronger. Then 2 points travel into Hemomancer, 5 points into Gushing Wounds for even more bleed chance on single target. It's pretty strong there as well. Then Transplant itself, we take 1 point travel into Acolyte's Fervor, 3 points into Dance of Blood for Rip Blood casts. This is pretty much most of our clear. Then 1 point travel into Rain of Blood for Detonation. This will apply a bleed. So we have 2 detonations so far. Then this brings it up to 4 detonations, 3 points in Depravity, 4 points into Scarlet Rain for the area, so our explosions are bigger, so that they hit more targets. And of course, 2 points into Black Mirror, which are even more. So this gets up to about uh, 7 explosions on a single target. And then, of course, it'll be an extra thanks to Dance of Blood. This can only hit one target once and not like 3 times on the same target. So you can either overlap with the blood splatters, or if you're hitting a single target, you'll only hit about 8 times. You may take 1 point into Hemophilia as the bleed chance on explosions, 100% chance. That's on top of all of your other bleed chance. Then we take 3 points into Bone Armor, then 2 points into Plated Bone. I'll explain why later. Then, of course, for Reaper form, this is your stereotypical Reaper form setup. Like I said, the only thing different is Death's Door for increased damage and low health, because the more increased damage, the better. And we're always on low health thanks to, of course, Death Seal. And then Death Seal, so this is a little bit different than normal. So you take 5 points into Corrupted Conscience, so that whenever we do turn it on, we get a bunch of increased damage. 3 points into Desperate Shroud, which gives us a bit of armor. Not enough for it to matter, but enough to, be useful. And of course, 1 point into Deadlock. Deadlock makes it so that whenever I press Death Seal, I'm always at 33%, which is how you get this to do a lot of damage. 1 point into Mortal Pulse. It makes it so that this Blood Wave thing, it's constantly casting and applying bleeds around us. Really good for when our transplant cooldown isn't up, so we can actually kill things. 2 points into Moratorium for duration. 1 point into Devouring Release. This will cast a Hungering Soul as well, so we get 2 hits per second thanks to Death Seal, which it will take our global bleed chance and apply it twice, which is nice. 1 point to Soul Stability. The reason why I'm doing this is because I'm grabbing Volatile Blood so that we have reduced health drain, and then we're going to grab 8 points into Unclosing Wound for a bunch of increased damage. Then, of course, we're going to take 5 points into Blood Pact for a lot of increased damage, but I haven't gotten to that point yet because I'm only level 84. Then, of course, we take 1 point travel into Carrion Breath, 3 points travel into Lethal Release, 1 point into Corporeal Cascade. It makes it so that our Death Seal is physical damage. The main reason why we want to do that is there are some idols, I believe there are some idols that give you increased chance to bleed on physical hit. See, for instance, this idol would be absolutely amazing for us once we do that, and that will apply to the Death Seal's Necrotic Pulse as well, since it's physical now. That's why we're grabbing Skeletal Sheath for Bone Armor on release, and it gets affected by the Bone Armor stuff from here. So this is pretty much giving us a bunch of DR when we're not in Death Seal form, which is pretty nice. It helps us not die while we're not in Death Seal. And that's pretty much it for the skills. For the passives here, take 8 points into Blood Aura for increased damage, 8 points into Forbidden Knowledge for Necrotic Res to help our resistances, 8 points into Stolen Vitality for more HP, 1 point travel into Crimson Gluttony so we can grab Veins of Power. So this is 36% increased duration. That on top of Valdir's Chalice brings us up to about 86% increased duration, which is really strong. Brings our bleeds almost up to like 5 to 6 seconds, which is really, really strong. And we take 8 points into Dance with Death for increased damage. Since we're always at low life with this build, thanks to Death Seal, this will give us about 120% increased damage. 8 points into Serrated Bones for more global bleed chance. 8 points into Desolation for increased damage. 1 point travel into Bed of Souls. 10 points into Volatile Blood, like I said, because we're going to be moving into Unclosing Wounds for even more increased damage. 8 points into 3 Plagues. That physical penetration is absolutely amazing for this build. We do have Shred, but Pen is I would rather have Pen for bosses. 5 points into Contagion Engine. It makes it so we deal a lot more increased damage when we're killing things. 4 points travel into Deathbringer, 5 points to Clairvoyant Insight. The main reason why we're grabbing this is because this is global crit multi and it applies to Salt the Wound. Then, of course, 5 points into Soul Maw makes it so the damage leeches health. We get 6% from this. It also increases the amount of leech we get from Valdir's Chalice as well, which is strong. So we have a lot of leech in the end of this. That's actually one of the best things about this build is the insane amount of sustain we have thanks to Valdir's Chalice plus Soul Maw. That's pretty much it for the skills. Like I said, you'd be grabbing 5 points of Blood Pact, then 8 points into Unclosing Wounds to finish it off. All right, and then we're getting into gear. The most important unique, the one I would say is required for the build, is Flyer's Pride, as it's a lot of increased chance to bleed and a lot of increased bleed effect. It's really, really strong. Now, of course, for the other unique would be Salt the Wound. Obviously, Salt the Wound isn't that strong, as I can show you, or it's 755. Then we go all the way to 500. So it's not what I would say, quote unquote, necessary, but it is pretty strong. It's obviously best in slot, but it's not required. Then, of course, Valdir's Chalice is kind of good. It's really good late game because it's a lot of sustain. The bleed duration is really good against bosses. And this, like the 20 health gained on kill per stack of bleed on the target, that makes it so whenever you transplant into a pack, you go from whatever health you were at to all the way to 100% every single time, which is really strong. Then, of course, for a helmet, this is pretty much our perfect in-slot helmet. This is pretty much exactly what we want. If you do end up dumping Salt the Wounds, you'd rather bleed effect instead of bleed chance. The cooldown recovery speed is for transplant, so you can transplant more. The amulet, this is a pretty trashy amulet. For my amulet, you'd want crit multi, increased damage over time, some resistance as well. Then for the axe, this is the perfect mods. We just want this on a Dragon Bone axe instead, because that'll raise it up to an implicit 100% chance on the implicit, so we get 50% from there, which is really strong. But other than that, this is like the absolute perfect axe. That's why I've been running this, is because the only thing that's better is to just run the other axe. Then for the chest, instead of that 10 mana, we can actually run a chest with increased bleed effect, increased fizz damage while transformed. You can either run that, or you can run increased bleed chance, or you can run bleed duration as well. All three of those mods are really strong. You don't really need to pick and choose between them, just whatever works, and of course a bunch of HP. Then for rings, pretty shitty rings. I just kind of use what would cap my resistances, or at least cap them closely. This ring kind of busted really. Actually, no, it did not. Actually, let me try Rune of Refining this. 1 second here. Sorry for doing this on stream. I'm on recording. Oh, there you go. Now we're at 74% void res. Way better, right? Obviously, you'd want better damage over time. You would want fizz damage there instead. But other than that, it's a pretty good ring. The rings I use, in the planner, you'd really want crit avoidance, as that's the best place to get it. Because I believe that the best place for a Raid of Dragons would be bleed chance, as the more bleed chance we get, the better, because of our transplant explosions. So you could run crit avoidance there, of course. You don't have to like choose between them, but I would prefer bleed chance myself. Then for the belt, this is pretty much the exact perfect belt you'd want, probably on the 5 potion belt base. But other than that, that's pretty much exactly what you're looking for. And of course, Salt the Wounds. Then for boots, my boots are absolute ass. And that's because I want to move into a Stymied Fate later on for the 22% increase cooldown recovery speed with transplant, which that will make it so that our transplant is like about 2.5, 2.4, 2.2 seconds, cooldown, which is really strong against bosses, because the faster we can transplant on things, the faster we can kill them. So that's why I'm running such shitty boots. Later on, of course, I'll upgrade to Stymied Fate. I just haven't dropped one yet. And I believe I've dropped some in the past, but I thought that I had Stymied Fate, and then I never picked it up. And then now, guess what? I have no Stymied Fates, which is kind of funny. And that's pretty much it for the gear. For the idols, we just want cooldown recovery speed with transplant. I'll show you here. Cooldown recovery speed with transplant. Cooldown recovery speed with transplant. Yeah, that might actually, instead of that increased damage, you might want chance to bleed on hit instead. That's one thing I would change. I'll have this fixed when I link it down in the description. because you want as much chance to bleed as possible. Then, of course, the cooldown recovery speed, because the faster you can transplant on bosses, the faster you can kill them. That's pretty much for idols. My idols right now are pretty shitty. I just want cooldown recovery speed with transplant. That's all I really want. And that's all I get. I didn't get a cooldown recovery speed for the top though. So you can actually just get some bleed on there until you get cooldown recovery speed. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the build overall. Sorry I had to cut it short. But like I said, I'll be in the middle of moving here soon, so I don't know how long I'll have to actually finish this build. That being said, thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you're at, and bye.